The December rain drummed against the windows of the glass and steel skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, creating a melancholic rhythm that echoed through the corridors of the 35th floor. Isabella Rodriguez adjusted her worn-out bag on her shoulder and checked once more the address scribbled on a crumpled piece of paper. Penthouse Technologies, Suite 3501. This was the place. At 26, Isabella carried the weight of 3 simultaneous jobs and a dream that seemed to drift further away with each passing day. She had graduated with honors in linguistics from Columbia University at the height of the pandemic, a time when the job market had collapsed, and opportunities in her field had become rarer than diamonds in the mud of Central Park. Her mother, Carmen, had worked as an office cleaner her entire life to pay for her daughter's education. "Mija, you're going to be different," she would always say in Spanish, her calloused hands holding Isabella's face. "You're going to use your mind, not your back." But reality had proven far crueler than dreams. For 2 years, Isabella had sent out resumes to translation agencies, international consultancies and universities, receiving only automated rejection emails in return. To survive in the most expensive city in the country, she had taken on work as a night cleaner in 3 different office buildings in Midtown. Monday through Friday, from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, she wandered the silent hallways, cleaning bathrooms, vacuuming carpets, and emptying trash bins, while the city that never sleeps dozed briefly around her. That cold December morning, Isabella had just finished her shift at the Chrysler Building when she received an unexpected call. The rough voice on the other end identified himself as Marcus Thompson, personal assistant to someone named Alexander Whitmore III. "I need an emergency cleaner for this morning," Marcus said bluntly. "Our regular employee is sick. Can you be here in an hour? Payment is in cash, $200 for 4 hours of work." $200. Isabella did the math quickly. That was more than she usually made in 2 full days. Even exhausted after 8 hours of cleaning offices, she couldn't turn it down. "I'll be there," she replied, jotting down the address with trembling hands. Now, standing before the double mahogany doors leading to the office of Alexander Whitmore III, Isabella took a deep breath and tried to ignore the irony of the situation. There she was, a woman with a master's degree in 3 languages, about to clean the office of one of the richest men in New York. Alexander Whitmore III had inherited a tech empire at 32 when his father died in a yachting accident in the Hamptons. In the past 5 years, he had transformed the family business from corporate software into a global powerhouse in artificial intelligence and machine translation. Magazines like Forbes and Fortune regularly speculated about his fortune, estimated at over $2 billion. Isabella pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and entered the office. The space was intimidating, a blend of modern luxury and classic elegance that screamed power and wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, where buildings stood like soldiers of glass and concrete against the gray winter sky. At the center of the room, behind a massive oak desk that likely cost more than Isabella's annual salary, sat Alexander Whitmore III. Perfectly combed blonde hair, immaculate Armani suit, and the posture of someone who had never worried about paying bills. He didn't even look up when she walked in. "You must be the substitute," he said without lifting his eyes, continuing to type on his MacBook Pro. "The cleaning supplies are in that closet. Start with the library and then do the executive bathroom. Don't touch anything on my desk." Isabella nodded silently and walked over to the indicated closet. As she organized the cleaning materials, she couldn't help but notice the imposing library that covered an entire wall of the office. Hundreds of books, many in languages she recognized: French, German, Italian, Japanese, Arabic, an impressive collection for someone who, according to the magazines, had graduated in business administration with mediocre grades. She began working meticulously, vacuuming the Persian rug that probably cost more than her 1-bedroom apartment in Queens. The sound of the vacuum created a constant hum that seemed to amplify the tense silence between them. Alexander remained focused on his laptop, occasionally taking calls in an authoritative tone that made it clear he was used to having his orders followed without question. As she dusted the shelves in the library, Isabella couldn't suppress her academic curiosity. Some of the books were rare editions of classic literature in languages she mastered. There was a first edition of 100 Years of Solitude in Spanish, L'Étranger by Camus in original French, and even a collection of poetry by Rumi in classical Persian. "Impressive collection," she murmured to herself softly, momentarily forgetting where she was. Alexander looked up for the first time since she had arrived. "Excuse me." Isabella felt her face flush. "Sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I just noticed some interesting titles. I won't disturb you again." He studied her for a moment, his cold blue eyes assessing her like a curious object he had stumbled upon. "You read?" The question carried a tone of disdain that made Isabella feel a flash of irritation. "Yes, sir, I read." "How convenient," he replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "An intellectual janitor. Her rarity in New York." Isabella bit her tongue and returned to her work, but something in his condescending tone had sparked a flicker of defiance she hadn't felt in a long time. For the next several minutes, she cleaned in silence, but she could feel his eyes on her as if he were testing her in some way she didn't fully understand. The atmosphere in the office had changed. What had begun as just another cleaning job was turning into something different, charged with a tension Isabella couldn't quite decipher. She finished vacuuming and moved on to the next task, unaware that the next few moments would completely alter the course of her life. The tension in the room grew thicker as Isabella continued her work, moving methodically through the executive bathroom. The marble surfaces gleamed under the soft LED lighting, reflecting her tired face as she scrubbed away invisible imperfections. Through the open door, she could hear Alexander's fingers tapping impatiently on his keyboard, punctuated by occasional phone calls conducted in that same dismissive tone he'd used with her. "Cancel the 3 o'clock with the Japanese delegation," she heard him say into his phone. "Tell them we'll reschedule when they're ready to discuss real numbers, not these insulting lowball offers." Isabella paused in her cleaning, recognizing the frustration in his voice. Despite his wealth and power, it seemed Alexander Whitmore III faced his own set of challenges. She'd read about Penthouse Technologies in business magazines during her lunch breaks. The company was attempting to break into the Asian market, but cultural and language barriers had proven more difficult than anticipated. When she emerged from the bathroom, Alexander was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his silhouette outlined against the grey December sky. The rain had intensified, creating rivulets that distorted the city view beyond. He seemed lost in thought, his usually perfect posture slightly slumped with what looked like genuine concern. "Problems with international expansion?" Isabella found herself asking, then immediately regretted the question. She wasn't supposed to engage in conversation beyond what was necessary. Alexander turned, his eyebrows raised in surprise. "Excuse me? I'm sorry, Mr. Whitmore. I overheard your call and it's none of my business." She began gathering her cleaning supplies, suddenly eager to finish and leave. "No, wait." His voice had lost some of its earlier condescension. "What makes you think you understand anything about international business?" Isabella felt heat rise to her cheeks again, but this time it was anger rather than embarrassment. The dismissive tone was back, and something inside her snapped. "Because I studied it, Mr. Whitmore. I have a master's degree in applied linguistics, with a focus on cross-cultural communication and business translation." Alexander stared at her for a long moment, his blue eyes narrowing as if trying to process this information. "You're joking." "I don't joke about my education, sir. Columbia University, graduated summa cum laude." Isabella's voice was steady now, professional. "I speak Spanish, French, and Mandarin fluently, and I have conversational skills in German and Arabic." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander walked back to his desk, but instead of sitting down, he leaned against it, studying Isabella with new interest. "Then what exactly are you doing cleaning my office?" The question hung in the air, like a challenge. Isabella set down her cleaning supplies and faced him directly. "Because sometimes having a degree isn't enough, Mr. Whitmore. Sometimes the economy crashes right when you graduate. Sometimes companies don't want to take risks on recent graduates with no experience. Sometimes you do what you have to do to survive in a city that costs $3,000 a month for a studio apartment." Her words carried the weight of 2 years of rejection, of dreams deferred, of nights spent scrubbing floors while her classmates built careers in their chosen fields. Alexander's expression had changed completely. The smug superiority was gone, replaced by something that might have been respect or at least curiosity. "Show me," he said suddenly. "Show you what?" Alexander walked to his bookshelf and pulled out a thick document bound in leather. "This." He placed it on his desk with a solid thud. "It's a contract proposal from our potential partners in Shanghai. 30 pages of legal and technical language that 3 different translation services have butchered, each one missing crucial nuances that could cost us millions." Isabella approached the desk cautiously. The document was indeed intimidating. dense Chinese characters interspersed with English legal terminology, the kind of complex business language that required not just fluency, but deep cultural understanding. What exactly are you asking me to do? Alexander's eyes gleamed with something between challenge and desperation. Translate this. Not just the words, the meaning, the cultural implications, the business subtext. If you can do it properly, if you can give me a translation that actually makes sense in context. He paused dramatically. The job is yours. What job? Director of International Communications. 6-figure starting salary, full benefits, your own office on this floor. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather rather than offering her a dream position. Isabella's heart began racing. You're serious? Dead serious. But it has to be perfect. Not good, not adequate, perfect. Because if I walk into that boardroom next week with another subpar translation, I'll lose a deal worth $50 million. Isabella looked down at the document, her mind racing. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for, dreaming of, working toward through all those long nights of cleaning offices. But the pressure was immense. One mistake, one misinterpreted phrase, and she'd not only lose this opportunity, but potentially damage his business deal. I'll need proper working conditions, she said, surprising herself with her boldness. A quiet space, access to specialized dictionaries and cultural reference materials, and at least 6 hours of uninterrupted time. Alexander smiled for the first time since she'd arrived, and it transformed his entire face. Done, you can use the conference room next door. I'll have Marcus bring you whatever resources you need. As Isabella picked up the document, she felt its weight. Not just the physical pages, but the enormous opportunity it represented. This was her chance to prove that all those years of study, all those nights of sacrifice had been worth it. One more thing, Alexander said as she headed toward the conference room. What's your name? Your real name, not what's on the cleaning service roster. Isabella Rodriguez. Well, Isabella Rodriguez, don't make me regret this. She turned back to face him, clutching the document to her chest. Mr. Whitmore, the only thing you'll regret is not finding me sooner. The conference room adjacent to Alexander's office was a sanctuary of polished mahogany and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered the same breathtaking view of Manhattan. Isabella spread the Chinese contract across the massive table, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was her moment. Everything she had worked for, studied for, dreamed of, condensed into 30 pages of complex legal and business terminology. Marcus Thompson appeared within minutes, wheeling in a cart loaded with dictionaries, legal references, and a high-end laptop connected to specialized translation databases. Mr. Whitmore said to give you whatever you need, he said, his tone noticeably more respectful than when he'd called her that morning. There's also coffee, water, and some sandwiches. He doesn't want you interrupted for anything. Isabella nodded gratefully and dove into the work. The first few pages were standard contract language, terms and conditions that, while complex, followed predictable patterns. But as she progressed deeper into the document, she encountered the real challenges. Cultural references that had no direct English equivalent, business concepts rooted in Chinese commercial law, and subtle implications that could make or break the entire deal. One particular clause made her pause. The Chinese text referenced guanxi, a concept that went far beyond simple business relationships. It encompassed trust, mutual obligation, and long-term partnership in ways that Western business culture often failed to grasp. Previous translators had simply rendered it as business relationships, completely missing the deeper cultural significance that the Chinese partners were trying to communicate. Isabella leaned back in her chair, remembering her professors at Columbia who had emphasized that true translation wasn't about converting words, it was about bridging worlds. She began crafting a translation that captured not just the legal requirements, but the cultural expectations embedded in the original text. Hours passed, unnoticed. Outside, the December afternoon grew darker, the rain continuing its steady percussion against the windows. Isabella worked with the focused intensity of someone who knew this was her one shot. She cross-referenced legal precedents, consulted cultural guides, and carefully constructed sentences that would resonate with American business executives while honoring the intent of their Chinese counterparts. Around 4 o'clock, Alexander knocked softly on the conference room door. "How's it going?" he asked, stepping inside with 2 cups of coffee. Isabella looked up, surprised to see genuine concern in his expression rather than the impatience she'd expected. "It's complex," Your previous translators weren't wrong exactly, but they missed crucial nuances. This isn't just a contract, it's a cultural bridge. Alexander sat down across from her, studying the pages covered with her handwritten notes. What do you mean? Isabella pointed to a specific section. Here, for example, the Chinese partners aren't just discussing profit-sharing ratios, they're establishing a framework for what they call face-saving, allowing both parties to maintain dignity if the partnership needs to be dissolved. It's deeply rooted in Confucian business ethics. And the other translators missed that? They translated the words, not the meaning. In Chinese business culture, how you end a relationship is just as important as how you begin it. Your partners are essentially offering you a respectful exit strategy, which is actually a sign of enormous trust and long-term thinking. Alexander's eyes widened slightly. That actually explains a lot about their negotiation style. They kept talking about mutual respect and harmonious dissolution, but our legal team thought it was just flowery language. It's not flowery language, Mr. Whitmore. It's the foundation of how they want to do business with you. Isabella turned to another section. And here, they're not just discussing technology transfer. They're proposing what amounts to a knowledge-sharing partnership that could benefit both companies for decades. For the next hour, Isabella walked Alexander through her preliminary findings, explaining not just what the contract said, but what it meant in the context of Chinese business culture. She watched his expression change from skepticism to fascination to something approaching awe. "This is exactly what we needed," he said finally. "How much more time do you need? 2 more hours? Maybe 3. I want to make sure every clause is not just accurate, but strategically sound from both cultural perspectives." Alexander stood to leave, then paused at the door. "Isabella, why didn't you lead with this when you applied for translation jobs? Your understanding of cultural business dynamics is extraordinary." Isabella felt a familiar sting of frustration. "I did lead with it, Mr. Whitmore, in dozens of cover letters, in interview after interview. But when employers see recent graduate and no direct experience, they stop listening. They want someone with 5 years of experience, but nobody's willing to give you the first opportunity to gain that experience. That's short-sighted of them. It's the reality of the job market, especially for someone like me, first-generation college graduate. No family connections in the business world, no internships at prestigious firms, because I had to work 3 jobs to pay for school." Isabella's voice carried the weight of countless rejections, but also a new confidence born from proving her abilities. Alexander nodded slowly. "Well, their loss is my gain. Finish the translation, Isabella. The job is already yours. You've more than proven your capabilities. But I want to see the complete work, because I have a feeling this is going to change everything for our Asian expansion." As he left the conference room, Isabella felt a surge of energy she hadn't experienced in years. This wasn't just about landing a job. It was about finally being recognized for her true capabilities, about proving that her mother's sacrifices and her own years of struggle had been worthwhile. She returned to the contract with renewed focus, knowing that each carefully chosen word was not just building a bridge between languages, but constructing the foundation of her new career. The rain continued to fall outside, but inside the conference room, Isabella Rodriguez was finally stepping into the future she had always known she deserved. By 7 o'clock that evening, the Manhattan skyline had transformed into a glittering tapestry of office lights against the dark December sky. Isabella sat back in her chair, stretching muscles that had been tense for hours, and gazed at her completed work. 30 pages of meticulous translation lay before her, not just converted words, but carefully crafted bridges between 2 business cultures. Alexander appeared in the doorway, looking unexpectedly casual with his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. "Ready for the final review?" Isabella nodded, gathering her notes. "More than ready." They moved back to Alexander's office, where he cleared space on his desk for her translation. As Isabella began presenting her work, she watched his expression shift from professional interest to genuine amazement. She explained each cultural nuance, every strategic implication, and the subtle ways the Chinese partners were extending trust through their carefully chosen language. "This section here," Isabella pointed to page 15, "your previous translators rendered as quality assurance protocols. But the Chinese text actually describes something closer to honor-bound excellence standards. They're not just promising to meet specifications, they're pledging their reputation on the outcome." Alexander leaned forward, studying the text. "And that matters because Because in Chinese business culture, reputation is currency. They're essentially putting up their most valuable asset as collateral. It's a level of commitment that goes far beyond typical Western contracts. As Isabella continued her presentation, she noticed Alexander's phone buzzing repeatedly with messages and calls that he ignored completely, unusual for someone who had answered every communication immediately that morning. His full attention was focused on her work, asking thoughtful questions and taking detailed notes. The financial projections in Section 4 are particularly interesting, Isabella continued. They've structured the profit sharing in a way that actually favors Penthouse Technologies in the first 3 years, which seems counterintuitive until you understand their long-term strategy, which is, they're investing in the relationship, not just the immediate profit. They believe that if they can establish trust and demonstrate the value of the partnership early on, the long-term benefits will far exceed the short-term concessions. It's brilliant, actually. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, flipping through the pages of translation. Isabella, this is extraordinary work. You've turned what looked like a standard licensing agreement into a comprehensive partnership strategy. The board is going to be amazed. Isabella felt a surge of pride, but also something else, a recognition that this moment was about more than just professional achievement. Mr. Whitmore, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity. Most people in your position would have dismissed me without a second thought. Alexander looked up from the documents, his expression serious. Most people in my position would have missed out on exceptional talent because of their own prejudices. I'm embarrassed to admit that if you hadn't corrected my assumptions about that book collection, I might have done the same thing. There was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that comes when two people recognize they've misjudged each other and found something valuable in the process. The rain had finally stopped, and the city lights sparkled clearly through the windows. There is one thing I'm curious about, Alexander said, closing the translation folder. You mentioned you speak 3 languages fluently, but this contract only required your Chinese skills. What about the other languages you mentioned? Isabella smiled, sensing something in his tone, not quite a test, but perhaps a final curiosity. Well, you did say translate this and the job is yours. You never specified which language to translate it into. Alexander raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Isabella stood up and moved to the whiteboard on the far wall of his office. You assumed I would translate it into English because that's what everyone else did. But your Chinese partners also do business in Europe and Latin America. Understanding their global perspective might give you additional strategic advantages. She picked up a marker and began writing. First, she wrote a key clause from the contract in perfect French. Les partenaires reconnaissent l'importance stratégique d'une approche culturellement sensible dans tous les marchés internationaux. Then, below it, she wrote the same concept in flawless Spanish. Los socios reconocen la importancia estratégica de un enfoque culturalmente sensible en todos los mercados internacionales. Finally, she added the English translation. The partners recognize the strategic importance of a culturally sensitive approach in all international markets. Alexander stared at the whiteboard, then at Isabella, his mouth slightly open in amazement. That's the same clause translated into 3 different languages, capturing the cultural nuances for 3 different business environments. Exactly. Your Chinese partners aren't just thinking about the American market. They're envisioning a truly global partnership. Understanding their multilingual perspective could open doors you haven't even considered yet. Alexander sat down heavily in his chair, running his hands through his perfectly styled hair, messing it up for the first time that day. Isabella Rodriguez, you have officially left me speechless. Isabella grinned, feeling more confident than she had in years. Is that a good thing or a bad thing, Mr. Whitmore? It's a remarkable thing. In 24 hours, you've gone from cleaning my office to revolutionizing my understanding of international business strategy. You don't just have the job. I want you to lead our entire cultural consultation division. As Isabella packed up her materials, she thought about calling her mother with the news. Carmen Rodriguez, who had cleaned offices for 30 years so her daughter could have opportunities she never had, would cry with joy. The cycle was finally broken. One last question, Alexander said, as Isabella headed for the door. How did you know? How did you know you could do this? Isabella paused, thinking of all the rejection letters, all the nights spent cleaning while dreaming of using her mind instead of her hands. Because sometimes, Mr. Whitmore, the most qualified person for the job is the one nobody expects to find.